unemployment, especially of young people. We need to coordinate our foreign policy, and we need to be champions of the international law, because there's not many other people out there in the world who will do it. We need to step up our role in the UN and also when it comes to climate change. Let us make Europe the counter-model to Trump, the light of liberty, of human rights, of rule of law, and also of generosity. Let us be the ones that show justice and compassion. And let us make sure we're not just speaking of those values, but we're actually demonstrating them in everything we do. The Statue of Liberty was once given by France to the younger sister, America, Sisters in Freedom and Rights. I think we should build more statues of liberty. We need to put them in Lesbos, in Lampedusa, where people arrive full of hope and fear. We need to put them everywhere where people are standing up for their rights and also for their neighbor rights. Let us be the Europe that brings forward, that champions those people who fight for the rights and the rights of others, no matter the nationality, their religion, their sex, their sexual orientation, no matter where they come from. Europe needs to be building bridges and not walls. Let us do that together. Thank you.
Grazie.
Thank you very much. Mr. Farage now, on behalf of the FDD group.
Thank you. Well, I can see that you're all very upset here this afternoon, and I've no doubt that the events in the USA over the last few weeks have been a very profound shock to you. Perhaps you're right. You see, what has happened here is somebody has stood on a manifesto for election, got into office, and within 1 week said that he will hold faith with his own electorate. It is called genuine democracy. Unlike the system we have in the European Union, where the unelected commissioners like Mogherini here have the sole right to propose legislation. So I'm sure that it's a great shock to you to see that a genuinely elected Democrat is doing what he was put in to do. And it must be, I would think today in Washington. Sorry. I can't hear you, mate.
Di questo Parlamento e delle funzioni istituzionali.
This Parliament has institutional functions, as does the Commission, out of institutional respect to the Commission, but also as a result of the Commissioner's President. We need to be polite, please. So, thank you.
And out of institutional respect, President, to the truth, perhaps you will understand and agree with me that within the European form of lawmaking, it is the unelected Commission that have the sole right to propose legislation. If I'm wrong in saying that, you can throw me out of this Parliament right here, right now, this afternoon.
Mr. Farage, I am just asking you to be a little bit more respectful, please. Thank you. You may continue.
Oh, I'll be respectful, all right, and perhaps you will be too, for the right of the leader of a political party that won the European elections in the United Kingdom in 2014. Now, it seems to me that actually, with all the anti-Trump rhetoric that is coming from everywhere, actually what we're hearing is the true nature of the European project, which is genuine anti-Americanism. Trump is motivated by protecting the United States of America from Islamic terrorism, whereas what has happened in this room and in governments around Europe is you have welcomed these people into your own homes. But can we please, just for a moment, look at the facts? Amongst all the hyperbole and the hysteria, all that Donald Trump has done is taken 7 countries that were identified by President Obama as posing a risk to the USA. Obama already had put in place extreme vetting. What Trump has done is for 90 days to say, let's examine that vetting and see whether it's good enough. But I want to ask you, Mr. Verhofstadt, and all the others, with your faux outrage today, where were you when Obama in 2011 banned any Iraqi from going into the country for 6 months? Why do I hear no criticism in this chamber or from the Commission of Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Bahrain and others who refused to take a single, not one, refugee or displaced person from Syria. And how can it be that on Holocaust Day, last Friday, not a single one of you criticised the 16 countries in the world that ban Israeli Jews from even going to their country on holiday? What is this hypocrisy? So perhaps what we need to do, Mr. President, and through you to the members, perhaps what we need to do is to be a little bit more constructive. All of us here say we're Democrats. Well, here's a chance to prove it. Let us invite President Trump to come here to this European Parliament. I'm sure as Democrats you'd all agree that what we need to do is to have an open dialogue with the newly elected, most powerful man in the world. And if you throw that rejection back in my face, then you prove yourself to be the anti-democratic zealots that I always thought you were.
Could we have a microphone for the speaker, please?
Grazie, onorevole Verhofstadt.
Thank you, Mr. Verhofstadt. Mr. de Graaf now for the ENF group, please.
President, Mr. Tusk recently said that the United States of America is as great a threat to the EU as Russia and Islamic State. Is Mr. Tusk suffering from irrational anxiety, from panic attacks that disturb his view on reality? President Trump has rightfully introduced a temporary stop on the entry of citizens from countries that were already identified by his predecessor, Mr. Obama, and Mr. Farage said that already, as countries that pose a threat to US security. His argument to improve border controls before allowing people to enter is completely valid. In the EU, we are directly suffering from the consequences of a failing border control. We have suffered attacks in Brussels, Nice, Paris and Berlin, and many lost their lives or were severely injured. Trump called the EU a mess, and he's right. It is a mess. And the outcry against President Trump is pure hypocrisy. Mr. Farage already said that. Where was the protest against the exclusion of Israeli citizens by the same Islamic countries that are now banned from the United States? You should be ashamed of jeopardizing the lives of EU citizens because of the failing border controls in the EU. And I call upon Mr. Tusk and upon the Commission to follow the example of President Trump. Install national border control. Keep jihadists out, not just from the 7 countries that President Trump singled out, but of many more that are responsible for the wave of illegal migrants in the EU. Thank you.
Thank you. During Nigel Farage's speech, a member of the British Labour Party sat behind him with a sign all the way through, and not till the end did someone come down to deal with that. I trust that something will be done to discipline this member, because if not, I'll write my own sign and go and sit over there. It might say something like "sell out."
Onorevole Etheridge.
Mr. Etheridge, please. Mr. Etheridge, we sent the staff to tell the member that he was not entitled to hold up that sign. Now, Mr. Papadakis from the non-attached members, 1.5 minutes.
Η επιλογή Τραμπ εκφράζει ανακατατάξεις ανάμεσα.
Thank you. We can see the trends of capital here. These travel restrictions are a dangerous development. Thousands of migrants and refugees are the victims of the capitalist system.
Fruitful, and it remains a firm point in our feelings and our actions. We continue to strongly admire the United States, what they've been historically and what they are today. But it's precisely because of that that it's so painful to note these proposals, these measures that are being taken by Trump. These are an attack on the European legal civilization. Let's say things as they are, Manfred. This travel ban aimed at the citizens of just a few Muslim countries has nothing to do with border management and fighting terrorism. This is a populist lie. Some people are being banned, others aren't. It basically depends on who Trump does business with. Let's say things as they are, because our citizens need clear words on this. This is an attack on the right to asylum and an attack on the rule of law. This is an attack, together with other things, the wall on the border with Mexico. I mean, this is an international country that's going to damage its relations with Mexico, with Latin America. The whole world's being affected by this virus that's being sown. Airlines, don't refuse to take people from these countries on your planes. Don't stop them travelling. Joe Linen's right here, as is Manfred Weber, when they say, well, if this ambassador were appointed, well, then he wouldn't be welcome, because I can't welcome someone who, even before they're appointed, says, I'm going there to destroy the European Union. Let me say to Mrs. May, to the UK government, do not play the Trojan horse to destroy the European Union. Don't take on that role. It would be good for member states to call their ambassadors for consultations with regard to what's going on in the United States. That would be a symbolic act, and it would also be a good thing. It would be a good thing also not to see Trump invited to Europe until this issue is resolved. Let me conclude by saying, like Mrs. Mogherini, I'm in favour of cooperation, but until Trump changes his line, the doors of Europe need to be closed in his face. Thank you.
Per il gruppo dei conservatori.
For the Conservatives and Reformist group now, Mr. Kamal, you have the floor.
Thank you. According to a study by the Cato Institute, a well-respected US think tank and a classical liberal think tank, since 1975, no American has been killed on US soil by a national from any of the 7 countries listed in President Trump's executive order. So those of us who believe that law should be fair, that there should be equality under the law, that the primary functions of law should be enforcement of contracts and social order, will rightly be concerned by this arbitrary ban, which affects not only Muslims, but also affects Christians fleeing persecution and war. And sending a message that there is some inherent contradiction between being a good Muslim and being a good citizen of a Western democracy simply plays into the arms of Daesh and other extremists who make exactly the same claim. It plays into their arms because they make exactly the same claim when they are recruiting disillusioned and disconnected young Muslim men and women as terrorists. But whatever we in this chamber may think, the fact is that Americans voted for a candidate that said what he thought. And now they find that they have a president that does what he promised to do. So we must accept that this president, his priorities, and these policies are the consequence of a growing tide of discontent, to be found not only in Middle America, but also in many of our countries. Electorates that have lost faith in mainstream politicians on both sides of the Atlantic. Electorates that have lost trust in politicians' ability to listen and act upon their legitimate concerns. Electorates attracted by simplistic solutions offered by politicians on the edges of the political spectrum. And so while we express our concerns over President Trump's executive orders, we must also realise that as long as the gains from globalisation are seen only in the portfolios of company directors and not in the pay packets of workers, as long as our migration and asylum policies are seen as more about compassion, diversity and political correctness, and less about ensuring integration, we will find politicians pursuing similar policies and making electoral gains in France, the Netherlands and elsewhere in the EU. So every time a mainstream politician dismisses those who disagree with the current direction of political travel in Europe and America, every time you dismiss them as racist or populists, this simply demonstrates an inability to offer a credible alternative. In the meantime, no matter how strongly we feel about the current policies of the US President, let us all ask ourselves, what is more effective, the hotheads of protest or the cool head of diplomacy? And let us make it clear to our American allies that decisions of the new US administration in these executive orders, which lack the support of Congress, which are arbitrary, which have been purely planned without preparation for the consequences, will not make America great again, and moreover, will not strengthen, but only weaken our transatlantic relationship. And also let us remember that friends are more likely to pay attention to friendly voices of reason, not raised voices of anger. Thank you.
Grazie.
Thank you. Good afternoon to everyone. Now Mr. Verhofstadt for the ALDE group, please.
Has ended his intervention and also work Mr. Kamal started, but I don't understand something not of your intervention, Mr. Kamal. You're first of all saying, yeah, that is not done. And then you are saying two phrases later, but we have to accept it because he is elected. No, it is not because he is elected that he can go against human values and the values of the United States of America. Even an elected president with a majority, and he has no majority of the popular vote in the US, have to listen to the American Constitution, has to listen to the American judiciary. And that is my start of my intervention. In fact, people are saying, or some people are saying in the US, yeah, it helps security. Well, it's nonsense. You have given the figures. Since 1975, all terrorists in the US came from 3 countries: Egypt, Saudi Arabia and Lebanon. None of them is on the list. It are 7 countries, and nobody came from that country since 1975 as a terrorist. So it's pure discrimination. And pure discrimination in a more broader approach, but because it's not only about this religious ban. It's about, fueling populism and nationalism for the moment, what the Trump administration is doing. And that's not only by appointing Mr. Farage as his spokesman here in the plenary, but it's also by having the idea to designate Malloch as the ambassador, and more important, let's be aware of that, Steve Bannon, member now of the National Security Council of the United States of America, a man who is openly saying we want a worldwide right-wing movement to get rid of the European Union, to get done with the European Union, and there they are sitting here. It's our 5th column, the 5th column, because Mr. Farage is working with Mr. Bannon. He sees him on a regular basis to, in fact, one thing, that's to see how the European Union can be destroyed in the coming years. Not thinking, dear colleagues, on one thing, it's a big risk to bet on nationalism and populism in Europe. We got that already in the past. We got already in the 20th century people who thought that nationalism and populism was the solution for our continent. And they have created the gruesome atrocities we have ever seen. 20 million deaths, Mr. Farage, have nationalism caused in Europe. And there is no family in the European Union who have not a grandfather of a grandmother or a son of a daughter who was not victim of that nationalism and of that populism. And that's the reason why we have created the European Union, to overcome that, to make a continent of peace. And I think what I see for the moment, that is an American president. Normally, what does it do an American president? Take Roosevelt, for example. He wanted to be the leader of the free world. I'm now seeing an American president who wants to be the leader of the fight against the free world, against solidarity and against tolerance. And I think it is an existential moment, Mr. President, for the European Union. We can only take one decision. We have the autocrat Putin who wants to divide Europe. We have President Trump who has a populist nationalist view and wants to disintegrate us. We have the threat of the radical Islamists in the south, and we have a bunch of people here who want to destroy inside the European Union. We can do one thing, that is unite us, fight back as the European Union, and I hope in La Valletta it will not only be the letter, and I support the letter of